On a quiet morning in Woodmere, New Jersey, two young Jewish brothers, Isaac and David Cohen, left for school, never to return. Their disappearance shattered the peace of their small town, leaving behind a decade of unanswered questions and unspeakable pain. But 11 years later, a shocking discovery beneath the murky waters of a nearby lake would uncover a dark secret that had been hiding in plain sight, threatening to destroy everything the town had ever known. It was a crisp autumn morning in the small town of Woodmere, New Jersey, when Isaac and David Cohen, two brothers from a quiet Jewish community, left for school. The streets were still empty, the town undisturbed by the hustle of daily life. But by the time the school bell rang that day, the brothers had vanished without a trace. No one saw them leave, and no one heard a thing. Their fate will remain a haunting mystery for years to come. Isaac and David Cohen were the heart of their quiet community. Even in a small town like Woodmere, where everyone knew each other's business, the brothers were well-loved, a perfect reflection of the values their parents had instilled in them. Isaac, the older of the two, was the more serious, always diligent about his studies, while David, just a year younger, had a sparkle in his eyes and a knack for making people laugh. That morning, as they walked down the street, their usual banter filled the crisp air. Isaac carried his backpack with a careful, practiced hand, while David hummed a tune, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his jacket. The autumn leaves swirled around them as they headed toward the bus stop, just like they had done hundreds of times before. Their mother, Leah, stood at the window, watching them walk away, her heart full of pride. It was the last time anyone would see them. The school day came and went, and by the time the final bell rang, Isaac and David had not returned. Their friends were the first to notice. A classmate mentioned that they hadn't been seen all day, but no one thought much of it at first. Kids skip school all the time, right? But as the hours ticked by and still no sign of the boys, worry began to creep in. Leah and her husband, Yosef, were the first to start calling around. The school, the neighbors, the town sheriff. No one had seen or heard anything. By the time night fell, the phone calls turned into frantic search parties. Neighbors gathered in small groups, canvassing the nearby streets and woods. But there was no trace. At first, the police chalked it up to a simple runaway case. "Boys get into trouble," Officer Martin said with a dismissive shrug, trying to reassure the community. But Leah knew her boys. They wouldn't run away. Not without a word. Not without a reason. Hours stretched into days. The whole town of Woodmere seemed to grind to a halt, consumed by the mystery. People stopped by to offer support, but no one could offer any real answers. Isaac and David Cohen had just vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions that no one could answer. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the search for the brothers grew colder. It was as though the town itself had swallowed them whole. Woodmere, once a place where time moved slowly and peacefully, became a community marked by an unsettling silence. For the first time, fear crept into the hearts of its residents. But what could have happened to Isaac and David? Theories started to circulate, some innocent, others far darker. Had they run away, or had something more sinister happened? The authorities expanded their search, calling in specialists, tracking dogs, and even using helicopters to scour the area. But the deeper they looked, the more elusive the boys became. It was as though they'd never existed. 1 year passed, then 2, then 5. With each passing year, the pain of not knowing what happened to Isaac and David grew more unbearable for their parents. They held on to hope, clinging to the belief that somewhere, somehow, their boys were still out there. But as the years wore on, the town of Woodmere slowly moved on, each person trying to forget what they couldn't explain. And then, just when it seemed as if the mystery would never be solved, a discovery was made, one that would shake the town to its core. A discovery that would bring long-buried secrets to the surface and expose the evil lurking beneath their peaceful town. The past had a way of catching up, and in Woodmere, it was about to catch up in a way no one could have ever imagined. The discovery came by chance, or so it seemed at first. 11 years had passed since Isaac and David Cohen disappeared from the streets of Woodmere. The once vibrant town had grown quieter over the years, the faces of those who had lived through the mystery beginning to fade into the background. The search had dwindled, the phone calls from worried parents, and the unanswered questions buried beneath a veil of uncertainty. Yet, there were still whispers of something dark in the air, a lingering suspicion that no one dared voice aloud. It was a small team of divers working to lay fiber optic cables at the bottom of the lake near the town that would unravel everything. The lake had been a peaceful, almost sacred place for the community. Children swam there in the summer. Families picnicked along its banks, and old-timers sat by the water's edge, watching the ripples glisten in the sun. It was a place of serenity, or at least it had been. The divers, who had been tasked with installing new infrastructure, didn't expect to find anything of consequence when they submerged into murky depths of the water. It was a routine job, the sort that happened every day without fanfare. But as the divers' equipment scoured the dark waters beneath, one of them noticed something unusual caught among the weeds and algae. A piece of cloth, torn and faded, drifted slowly in the current. At first, it seemed insignificant, just another piece of debris. But as they drew it closer, they realized it wasn't just trash. The fabric was part of the school uniform, one they recognized from local schools in Woodmere. The pattern was unmistakable, blue and white stripes, the kind worn by the children in the area. But this was something more disturbing. This was evidence. The diver signaled to his partner, who came over to inspect it. Together, they gently pulled it from the water, and as the fabric emerged from the depths, they saw something else, a worn leather backpack, submerged and waterlogged, tangled among the weeds. The smell of decay was overpowering as they carefully unbuckled the straps and opened it. Inside, there were papers, a notebook, and a pencil case, all soaked and nearly disintegrated from years of being submerged. But the most chilling thing of all was a single photo that had been trapped at the bottom of the bag. It was barely recognizable, but the faces were clear enough. Isaac and David, their smiling faces staring up from the picture, frozen in time, as if they had been waiting for someone to find them. The divers immediately called their supervisor, who contacted the local authorities. The news spread quickly through the town, and within hours, the police had arrived, bringing in forensic specialists and evidence teams to investigate. The lake was shut down, its waters now the center of a renewed investigation. The town of Woodmere had been jolted awake, its painful memory of the missing brothers revived. The discovery in the lake was not just a forgotten relic of the past. It was proof that something had happened to Isaac and David, something that had been hidden beneath the surface all these years. As the authorities began their investigation, they unearthed more disturbing evidence. Nearby, they found the brothers' school books, weathered but still intact, suggesting that they had been left behind in a hurry. The area around the lake, once a peaceful, quiet stretch of nature, was now turned upside down by the chaos of search. And with each passing day, more questions arose, none of them providing any answers. What had happened to the boys that day? Why had they been near the lake? Had they been running away, or had they been brought here? And most disturbingly, why had no one thought to search the lake before? For Leah and David Cohen, the discovery was both a blessing and a curse. The truth they had longed for, to know what happened to their children, was finally within their reach. But it came at a cost. The image of their boys, forever frozen in that photo, was now burned into their minds. The weight of the years without answers seemed unbearable. And the worst part? The discovery was just the beginning. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that the truth would expose not just what happened to Isaac and David, but a darkness that had festered within Woodmere for years, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for someone to pull it into the light. The town would never be the same. And neither would Leah and Yosef. What had started as a simple disappearance of two boys had now turned into a nightmare, one that would unravel everything the peaceful town had ever known. The town of Woodmere had always been a place where nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. It was a small, peaceful community where everyone knew everyone else's name. In the years before Isaac and David Cohen vanished, life had flowed smoothly, as predictable and steady as the tides that lapped at the edge of the lake. But after the discovery of the boys' belongings, everything changed. As the police investigation intensified, so did the whispers. In the beginning, the theories had been innocent enough. Some people thought the boys had run away, maybe seeking adventure or escaping from something in their home lives. Others suggested they might have simply gotten lost, wandering too far into the woods surrounding the lake. But as more pieces of evidence came to light, the theories became darker, more sinister. The photo, once a symbol of innocence, now haunted Leah and Yosef, the image of their smiling boys, tucked away in a damp and ruined bag, seemed to suggest that Isaac and David had known something that had led them to the lake. They had been there for a reason, and the reason wasn't good. Local authorities brought in a team of experts to sift through the lake bed and surrounding area. With each new find, the questions only deepened. They uncovered a series of hidden paths near the water, concealed by overgrown bushes and trees. These paths led to an old, abandoned shed, one that had been forgotten by most of the town. The doors were rusted and the windows were broken, but inside, it was clear that someone had been there recently. The shed was filled with old tools and discarded furniture, but what really caught the investigators' attention were the old, tattered notebooks scattered across the floor. The pages were stained and brittle, the ink faded, but enough remained for the team to piece together the fragments of a disturbing story. The notebooks contained strange, cryptic writing, lists of names, symbols, and dates, none of it making much sense at first glance. But as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the writings weren't random. They were connected. The names mentioned in the notebooks seemed to belong to people in Woodmere. Some of them were well-known, others more obscure. But there was one name that stood out, repeated again and again, David Cohen. How could that be? The notebook seemed to reference David specifically, often in strange and unsettling contexts. The more they examined it, the more the picture became grim. David had written in these notebooks. But why? What connection did he have to whatever was hidden in that shed? Leah, devastated by the thought that her son might have been involved in something dark, couldn't bring herself to accept it. She knew her boys. They had been innocent, sweet, full of life. They wouldn't have been drawn into anything sinister. Or at least, that's what she wanted to believe. But the evidence didn't lie. A local historian, who had lived in Woodmere for decades, came forward to explain the significance of some of the symbols found in the notebooks. She recognized them immediately. They were ancient symbols, ones used in rituals that had been whispered about in the town for generations. These rituals had been long forgotten, dismissed as myths, and yet here they were again, creeping back into the fabric of their quiet community. It was then that the investigators discovered a connection between the shed and a series of disappearances that had been forgotten or deliberately ignored by the townspeople. These disappearances occurred every few decades, always involving young children, always occurring under strange, inexplicable circumstances. Theories about these disappearances had been swept under the rug, buried by time and selective memory. But the notebooks, the symbols, the path leading to the shed, all pointed to something far darker than anyone had ever imagined. The police now had a new question to answer. What was the connection between the mysterious disappearances, the boys, and the rituals described in the notebooks? Leah, meanwhile, could hardly keep herself together. The hope she had clung to for so long, that her boys might still be alive, seemed to slip further away with every new revelation. She tried to keep her composure, but the weight of the past decade, combined with the discovery of these hidden truths, threatened to break her. As night fell over Woodmere, the quiet that had once been comforting now felt oppressive. The stars above the town seemed distant, almost mocking, as though they were watching the unraveling of something that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. The town, for the first time in years, was on the verge of confronting the darkness it had long denied. Leah couldn't help but wonder, was this the end of her search for her children, or had she only just begun to uncover the real horror? As the investigation into Isaac and David Cohen's disappearance continued to unearth more unsettling clues, the town of Woodmere was forced to confront something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, but each discovery brought more questions and fewer answers. The notebooks, the shed, the cryptic symbols, they all pointed to a hidden chapter in the town's history, one that had been deliberately forgotten. Local historians and detectives worked tirelessly to decipher the connections, but it seemed that the deeper they dug, the darker the truth became. One evening, as Leah sat in her living room, unable to sleep from the overwhelming weight of the investigation, her phone rang. It was Detective Hayes, the lead investigator, and his voice was tight with urgency. "Leah," he said, his tone grave, "we need to talk. We've uncovered something you need to know." At the sheriff's office, Detective Hayes laid out a stack of photographs, each more disturbing than the last. They were old, grainy images from the town's past, but they had been hidden away for decades. As Hayes turned over the top photo, Leah's heart stopped. It was an image of the very same shed by the lake, but the people in the photograph were not who she had expected. The faces staring back at her were familiar, though twisted by time and age. They were all local residents, people she had known all her life. And standing at the center of the photo, with his arms raised in what appeared to be a ritualistic gesture, was none other than Mayor Adamson, the man who had been Woodmere's trusted leader for as long as Leah could remember. Hayes didn't mince words. "We've identified the mayor as being part of an underground group that's been operating for decades, possibly longer. We believe they were involved in a series of occult rituals meant to ensure the town's prosperity and security, in exchange for something darker. The group, whatever it was, had members from all walks of life, but they all shared one thing in common: secrecy. The shock that ran through Leah was like a cold rush of water. For years, she had trusted the mayor. He was a man she had voted for, a man who had stood at the front of every town meeting, offering solutions and comfort during difficult times. To think that he could be involved in something so vile, something that had stolen her children, and possibly many others, left her speechless. "And the boys," Leah whispered, struggling to hold back tears. "Where do they fit in all this?" Hayes's face darkened. "We think Isaac and David stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see. We believe the group, or at least some of its members, have been involved in more than just rituals. They've been covering up these disappearances for years, making sure no one looked too deeply into the past. The notebooks we found, they were David's. He must have found something that tied all of this together, and he tried to tell us through his writings, but he didn't get the chance." Leah's hands trembled as she gripped the photographs, the weight of the past decade pressing down on her chest. The truth was unraveling, but at what cost? Her children had been caught in the crossfire of something monstrous, and no matter how much she searched for answers, it seemed there would always be more darkness waiting to be uncovered. The investigation didn't stop there. The more Hayes dug into the mayor's past, the more horrifying revelations came to light. The rituals weren't just a matter of local superstition. They were tied to a much larger, much older network of people, an insidious web of power that spanned generations. The group wasn't merely concerned with wealth or security. They were after something more: control, absolute control over the fate of Woodmere, and perhaps even beyond. Leah was left with a choice: to continue seeking the truth, no matter where it led, or to walk away and try to rebuild her life without knowing the full extent of what had happened to her sons. But she couldn't walk away. Not when there was still a chance to find out the full truth. She owed it to Isaac and David. She owed it to herself. As the days passed, the tension in Woodmere grew palpable. People began to take sides, some rallying behind the investigation, while others, including many who had once been friends, began to distance themselves. It was clear that the town's history, its foundations, had been built on a lie. And now, the ugly truth was emerging, piece by piece, threatening to tear everything apart. Leah wasn't the only one affected by the unraveling of Woodmere's dark past. The entire town felt the weight of it, each person grappling with the horror that had been lurking beneath the surface for so long. But there was one thing Leah was certain of: she couldn't stop now. The truth was out there, and no matter how deeply it wounded her, no matter how much it shattered the community, she had to see it through. The final piece of the puzzle was just within reach. The mayor was no longer in hiding. He had gone to ground, knowing that his involvement in the occult rituals was about to be exposed. And as Leah and Detective Hayes closed in on him, she realized that the real battle was just beginning. Whatever happened next, Leah knew one thing for certain: the quiet, peaceful town of Woodmere would never be the same. Leah couldn't sleep that night. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each more unbearable than the last. The truth was within her grasp, but the weight of what it meant was almost too much to bear. She had uncovered a darkness so deep, it threatened to swallow not just her family, but the entire town of Woodmere. And still, The questions loomed. What happened to Isaac and David? And what role did the mayor play in their disappearance? The town that had once felt like a refuge now felt like a prison. The smiles that had once greeted her on every street corner now seemed hollow, the friendly faces masking something darker. Leah couldn't help but wonder how many others in this town had been complicit in the secrets that had been kept from her. Had anyone seen something and turned away? Had they known and kept quiet for their own gain? Detective Hayes called her early the next morning, his voice tense. "Leah, we found something. It's not just the mayor. There's more. It's bigger than we thought." They had finally tracked down the mayor's whereabouts. He had gone into hiding, vanishing from the public eye as soon as the investigation into the occult group began to tighten its grip around him. But Hayes had one lead, a phone call made from the mayor's office 2 nights ago. The call had been traced to a cabin deep in the woods, far from town, a place that had been abandoned for years. It was a perfect hiding spot for someone trying to erase their tracks. Leah's heart raced as she stood in her kitchen, gripping the phone. "I'm coming," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor of fear coursing through her veins. She couldn't afford to hesitate now. If there was any chance of finding the answers, this was it. The drive to the cabin was long and filled with tension. The trees seemed to close in around her, the fog rising from the ground as if trying to obscure the truth. When they arrived, Hayes led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The cabin was old. It was decaying and overgrown with vines, but there was something undeniably sinister about it. It looked as though it had been untouched for years, and yet Leah could feel that something was very wrong. They entered carefully, weapons drawn, each step echoing in the silence. The air inside was thick with dust, the stale scent of decay heavy in their lungs. There was no sign of the mayor, but something else was waiting for them. Something worse. In the center of the cabin lay a table covered in symbols, dark, twisted shapes carved into the wood. The markings matched those found in David's notebooks, symbols that had been used in the rituals, the very same ones the mayor had been a part of. At the far end of the cabin, a hidden door led to a basement, its entrance obscured by old furniture. Hayes motioned for Leah to stay back as he descended the creaky stairs. The air grew colder the further they went, and Leah's stomach twisted with dread. They reached the bottom, and Hayes hesitated. Then he opened the door to a small room. It was a grim sight. A circle of candles surrounded an altar, and beneath it, an old leather-bound book lay open. Its pages were yellowed, filled with strange text that Leah couldn't read, but she knew what it was. This was the heart of the ritual. The book had likely been used for years, its pages turned by hands that had no right to touch such things. And then, as Hayes shifted his flashlight, Leah saw something that made her blood run cold. Taped to the wall was a large map of Woodmere, and marked in red were locations, each one a place where a child had vanished over the years. There, in the middle of the map, was a circle drawn in dark ink. It was the lake. The realization hit her like a freight train. The disappearances were no accident. The children weren't just vanishing. They were being taken. The rituals, the dark symbols, the town's history, it all pointed to one horrific truth. Isaac and David hadn't run away. They had been taken. The town had been offering its children up to something far more sinister, hidden beneath its quiet, peaceful exterior. A chill ran down Leah's spine as she pieced it together. The mayor had known all along. The group had been orchestrating these disappearances for decades, using the town's most vulnerable as pawns in a ritual that had been passed down through generations. Isaac and David had been the latest sacrifice. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence, a faint scuffling, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone clearing their throat. Leah spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward. It was the mayor. He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was cold, calculating. "I was wondering when you'd find me, Leah," he said, his voice thick with arrogance. Hayes raised his gun, his finger hovering over the trigger. "You're under arrest for the disappearance of Isaac and David Cohen, and for the murders of many others." The mayor chuckled darkly, unfazed. "You still don't understand, do you? Woodmere thrives because of these rituals. The town's prosperity, its peace. It's all because we've kept the darkness at bay. But you, Leah, You've disrupted the balance. The town needs to be protected, and sacrifices must be made. Leah's hands clenched into fists, rage burning through her. She had lost everything. Her boys, her peace, her belief in the goodness of this place. You think this town is better off because of what you've done, she spat. You've destroyed it. You destroyed everything that was good about it. The mayor stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling certainty. The town doesn't matter to me. What matters is what's coming next. The cycle continues. It has to. Before Leah could react, the mayor lunged forward, but Hayes was faster. A shot rang out in the dim light of the basement, echoing off the walls. The mayor collapsed, his smug expression now replaced with shock and pain. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The mayor's body lay still, the threat gone, but the horror of what had been uncovered remained. Leah took a deep breath, looking around the room, the map, the altar, and the book. Her heart felt heavy, knowing that the truth had finally come to light, but at such a terrible cost. Isaac and David would never come back. The town of Woodmere would never be the same. But as the first light of dawn began to creep through the cabin's broken windows, Leah knew one thing. The evil had been exposed, and she would make sure it never returned. Leah's heart was heavy as she stood in her kitchen, staring at the photo of Isaac and David. The smiling faces of her sons felt like distant memories from a life that no longer existed. It had been years since their disappearance, but the pain never fully went away. She had spent every day searching for them, hoping to uncover the truth of what had happened. The discovery at the cabin had changed everything. The truth about the mayor and the rituals he led, including the ones that had claimed Isaac and David, had shattered the town's peaceful facade. Woodmere, once a quiet and idyllic place, now seemed tainted by a dark past no one had ever imagined. Detective Hayes had become her ally through it all. His determination to uncover the truth, despite the dangers, gave Leah a sense of hope. But even Hayes was shocked by the extent of the corruption in Woodmere. As he sat across from her, his face tired and weary, he spoke the words that had been on Leah's mind for days. "We're not done yet, Leah," Hayes said quietly. "The mayor's dead, but the network that supported him is still out there. We need to find everyone involved and make sure this never happens again." Leah nodded. The worst part had only just begun. The town she had trusted for so long was now a place of fear, secrets, and betrayal. The people she had once known, neighbors, friends, even the mayor, had all been complicit in something horrible. The following days were filled with more discoveries. The investigation into the mayor's involvement with the occult group continued, but the more they dug, the darker it became. It wasn't just the mayor. There was a network of people in town, doctors, teachers, business owners, all part of a group that had been sacrificing children for power and prosperity. Isaac and David had been the latest victims. One evening, a few days after the mayor's death, Hayes called Leah again. His voice was tight. "Leah, we found something. It's not just the mayor. There's more. We need to meet." They met at a cafe, and Hayes slid a folder across the table. Inside were old, grainy photographs, showing the mayor with other familiar faces, neighbors, teachers, and townspeople Leah had known her entire life. These people weren't just bystanders. They were active participants in the rituals. "These photos go back generations," Hayes said. "The mayor wasn't the first. It's been going on for over 100 years. Leah's mind spun as she looked at the faces in the photos. The people she had trusted had been part of the evil that had consumed her sons. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. How had she never seen it? How had they all kept this secret for so long? "We need to go public with this," Leah said, her voice unwavering. "People need to know. The whole town needs to know." Hayes hesitated, but nodded. "We'll make sure the truth comes out, but it won't be easy. Some people won't believe it." "I don't care," Leah said, standing up. "This needs to stop." The investigation intensified. Detective Hayes and his team worked tirelessly to gather evidence, and soon the town was filled with whispers. The truth could no longer be ignored. People began to turn on each other, some defending the old way of life, while others demanded justice for the children who had been sacrificed over the years. The trials began, and Leah found herself in the front row, watching the people she had once trusted stand trial for their involvement in the disappearances. The courtroom was filled with tension as families of the victims, including Leah, sat in stunned silence. It was both a victory and a tragedy. The guilty parties were convicted, but Isaac and David could never come back. As the final trial ended and the last conspirators were sentenced, Leah felt a strange emptiness. Justice had been served, but it hadn't brought back her sons. No amount of punishment could undo what had been done. Leah left the courthouse, the weight of the past finally beginning to lift from her shoulders. The town was forever changed, and she would never look at it the same way again. But she had done it. She had exposed the truth, and the people responsible would never harm anyone again. The memory of Isaac and David would live on in her heart, and in the hearts of all the children who would never be forgotten. Woodmere's dark past had been uncovered, and Leah knew she had given her sons' lives meaning. Though the pain would never fully fade, she had found a quiet strength in the truth, and with that truth, she could finally begin to heal. The days after the trials passed slowly, each one dragging Leah further into the quiet realization that life, no matter how much it changed, would never feel the same. The town of Woodmere was still reeling from the shock waves of the revelations, its once serene streets now burdened with suspicion and mistrust. Every face she passed seemed different, as though the truth had altered the very essence of the people she had once considered family. Despite the justice that had been served, Leah could not shake the sense of loss that clung to her like a shadow. Isaac and David were gone. The world they had once inhabited, the one they had filled with laughter and love, was gone too, replaced by a grim reality. They were never coming back, and no amount of punishment could reverse the evil that had been done. One morning, a few weeks after the trials, Leah found herself standing in front of her son's room, the door slightly ajar. It had remained untouched since their disappearance. She had wanted to keep it that way, a shrine to their memory, but today was different. She stepped inside, her heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. The room was as it had been, the bed neatly made, their school books piled on the desk, the posters of space missions and sports heroes still on the walls. It was a picture of innocence, a life frozen in time. But it also felt hollow, like the room itself had been waiting for something to return, only to remain empty. Leah walked over to the desk and ran her fingers over the notebooks that had been left behind. She had never looked at them before, too afraid of what they might hold. But now, with the truth out in the open, she knew she needed to understand. She opened the first notebook carefully. The pages still crisp and clean despite the years of abandonment. The words written on the first page were in David handwriting, neat and meticulous. "I want to go to the moon," it read, followed by a drawing of a spaceship. The page seemed almost ordinary, filled with the simple dreams of a young boy. But as Leah flipped through more pages, the entries grew more troubling. There were notes about strange people, about dark figures lurking at the edge of the woods, and about the things David had seen when he and Isaac had wandered away from home on that fateful day. One entry stood out among the rest. "They told me not to tell anyone, but I'm scared. Isaac is scared too. They don't want us to leave." Leah's breath caught in her throat. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. Isaac and David had known. They had known something was wrong, something that had led them to the lake, something they hadn't been able to escape. Tears blurred her vision as she clutched the notebook to her chest. She hadn't wanted to see this. She hadn't wanted to know the depth of the fear they had felt, but it was the truth. And now, with the truth in her hands, she understood what had driven them to run, what had led them to the place where they had ultimately disappeared. The room felt suffocating as Leah sat down on the edge of the bed, the weight of the past pressing down on her. The town had moved on, at least on the surface. The trials were over, the guilty parties imprisoned, but the scars of what had happened would never fade. Woodmere had been poisoned by a darkness that had thrived for far too long, and even now, it was impossible to escape. As Leah sat there, the doorbell rang, breaking the silence. She wiped her eyes, stood, and walked downstairs to find Detective Hayes standing at her front door, his face serious, his posture tense. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low. Leah stepped aside to let him in, sensing that something important had happened. Hayes walked into the living room and sat down, glancing at her with a look of hesitation. "Is everything okay?" Leah asked, though she already feared what he might say. "We've got a lead," Hayes replied, his voice tight with emotion. "It's about the town's past. More specifically, about the people who were involved in the rituals. We've uncovered something that connects the group to a larger network. People beyond Woodmere. People who had a much bigger stake in all of this than we realized." Leah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? You're telling me this isn't over?" "No," Hayes said quietly. "It's not over. The group in Woodmere was just a small piece of something much bigger. We've traced some of their connections to other towns, other states. The rituals, the sacrifices, they've been happening for years in places you would never think to look." Leah felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Who else is involved? How many more people are out there? "That's the thing," Hayes continued. "We don't know yet, but we're going to find out. We need your help, Leah. The truth has to come out, and we need to stop them before they hurt anyone else." Leah's mind raced. She had thought it was over, thought that justice had been served. But now, she realized how wrong she had been. The truth was still buried. It was even deeper than she could have imagined. This wasn't just about Isaac and David anymore. This was about every child who had been taken. Every life destroyed by the sinister network that had been operating in the shadows for decades. For the first time in weeks, Leah felt something stir within her. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was determination. She had to see this through. For Isaac, for David, for every other victim who had been silenced by the darkness. "I'll help," she said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes." Hayes nodded, his eyes meeting hers with an unspoken understanding. "We need to expose them. We can't let this go on any longer." Leah took a deep breath and, for the first time in a long while, felt like she had a purpose again. The road ahead would be long, and it would be filled with danger and uncertainty. But she was ready for Isaac, for David, and for every child who had been lost to the evil that had festered in Woodmere for so long. They would stop it, together. The weeks that followed were a blur of investigation, desperation, and small victories. Leah's resolve hardened with each passing day. The darkness that had been hiding in plain sight for so long was now being exposed piece by piece. But the truth was far more horrifying than anyone could have predicted. The ritualistic network that had operated in Woodmere for decades extended much further than any of them realized, to neighboring towns, even other states. The town, once a symbol of quiet life, had been a small cog in a machine far bigger and far older than she could comprehend. Detective Hayes worked tirelessly, tracing the network's connections, following leads, and contacting other law enforcement agencies. The evidence they uncovered seemed to paint a picture of an organized operation, one that was driven by something much darker than mere greed or power. There were records, documents, and communications between members of the group that revealed their true intentions. They believed that these rituals would grant them immortality, control, and prosperity for generations to come. And they had been doing it for over a century. Leah had seen the evidence. She had read the reports and seen the pictures. The faces of people she had trusted, the same people who had once smiled at her on the streets, now revealed as the very perpetrators of the evil that had stolen her children. But despite the justice being served in courts, despite the guilty being arrested, there was still an unsettling sense that the battle was far from over. Too many people were involved. Too many were still out there. One afternoon, Hayes came to Leah's house with a grim look on his face. She had grown accustomed to his serious expressions, but this one felt different, heavier somehow. "Leah, there's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice strained. "We've uncovered a list of other towns where similar rituals have been carried out. It's not just Woodmere. The group is much more widespread than we initially thought. And they're not going to stop. They've got power, real power, and they're going to do whatever it takes to keep it." Leah's heart raced. "What are we up against?" "We don't know yet," Hayes said, his eyes dark. "But it's bigger than we realized. The network is more organized, more dangerous than anything we've encountered. And the people at the top, they're not going to go down without a fight." Leah clenched her fists. "What do? We expose them," Hayes said, determination in his voice. "We bring it all to light. We can't let them win." Leah nodded, her mind made up. She couldn't sit back anymore. The grief of losing Isaac and David still weighed on her, but was now tempered by a fire, a need for justice, not just for her sons, but for all the other victims who had been silenced. She would do whatever it took to make sure this ended. But the deeper they dug, the more danger they faced. The group had eyes everywhere. People Leah had known for years, people who had seemed like nothing more than ordinary citizens, were now revealed to be part of this dark network. It was as though the entire town had been infected by a malevolent force. Trust became a luxury, and fear settled over every conversation, every glance. One night, after a particularly difficult meeting with law enforcement from other towns, Hayes came to Leah's house late. There was a sense of urgency in his step as he walked through the door, his face tight with concern. "I think they know we're getting close," he said, his voice low. "There's been talk, threats. It's only a matter of time before they come for us." Leah stood in silence, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do we do now?" "We stay ahead of them," Hayes replied, determination in his eyes. "We take the fight to them." The next few days were a blur of planning, phone calls, and strategy. The team was gearing up for one final push to expose the full extent of the network. It was all or nothing now. But just as they were about to launch their final operation, something unexpected happened. Leah received an anonymous tip. A message slipped under her door in the dead of night. It was simple, written in a scrawl she didn't recognize. "You're too late. We've already won." The message sent a chill through Leah's body, a feeling of dread settling deep in her stomach. She showed it to Hayes the next morning, and his face grew pale as he read it. "They know we're coming for them," Hayes said quietly. "They know we're about to expose everything." Leah's hands shook as she stared at the note. It was clear now. The network wasn't just powerful. It was organized and calculating. They had been planning for this moment, waiting for someone to dig too deep to get too close. "We can't stop now," Leah said, her voice firm, even though her heart was racing. "We've come too far." Hayes nodded, his expression resolute. "We go public with everything. We release all the evidence, names, locations, connections. We take the power away from them." Leah stood tall, her decision made. "We take back the truth." With everything on the line, they did just that. Hayes and Leah worked with the remaining team of investigators to release every shred of evidence they had gathered, every name, every connection. It wasn't just a local scandal anymore. It was national news. The truth was out. The rituals, the dark network that had festered in the shadows for so long, was finally exposed. The aftermath was chaotic, but there was one thing Leah knew for certain. The darkness that had stolen her children would never hold sway again. The truth had burned to the lies like a cleansing fire, and with it, Woodmere and every other town that had been touched by this evil would begin to heal. Leah could never undo the past. Isaac and David were gone, and the scars of what had happened would remain with her forever. But the strength to stand up, to fight for the truth, was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. The darkness had been exposed, and with that, there was a flicker of light, a chance for redemption, not just for her sons, but for all the lost souls who had been silenced. Woodmere was no longer a town of secrets. It was a town that had faced its past and emerged, bruised but unbroken. And for Leah, that was the beginning of something new. The aftermath of the truth being revealed was as messy as it was necessary. Woodmere, a town that had once been a quiet corner of the world, had now been thrust into the national spotlight. News outlets, journalists, and law enforcement from across the country flocked to the town, eager to report on the dark history that had been hidden for so long. But for Leah, none of it mattered. Isaac and David were still gone. The trials had ended. The guilty had been convicted. But the emptiness inside her remained. The satisfaction of seeing justice served was fleeting, but it couldn't fill the hole that had been left in her heart. Her sons would never come home. She had fought for them, uncovered the truth, and exposed the evil that had lurked beneath the surface of Woodmere. But the final victory, the one she so desperately needed, could never be hers. Leah spent the days following the exposure of the ritual network in a haze. She hadn't returned to the house for a few weeks, unsure how to face it, unsure of what was left for her in that space that once held so many memories. But it was time to face it, time to confront the ghosts of her past, and hopefully begin the slow process of healing. The first time she stepped inside their house again, it felt foreign. The furniture was the same, the walls still painted the same soft blue, but it no longer felt like home. It felt cold. The walls that had once echoed with laughter now seemed to hold only silence. The pain of what had been lost was overwhelming, and yet Leah knew she had to start somewhere. She walked to Isaac and David's room, the door still slightly ajar. It had remained untouched since the day they vanished. She had never been able to bring herself to clean it out, to remove their things. But now, standing there, she knew it was time. It was time to put the ghosts of the past to rest. The room still smelled faintly of the cologne Isaac used to wear, of the sweet scent of David's favorite crayons and books. Everything was the same as it had been, as if they might walk in at any moment, just like they had on so many mornings before. But the reality of their absence hit her harder than ever. Leah took a deep breath and started going through the drawers. Each item she touched reminding her of what had been lost. Isaac's soccer trophies, David's art supplies, their school uniforms. She folded each item carefully, packing them away one by one. With every item, the grief felt more real, but at the same time, it felt like something was shifting inside her. She wasn't moving on, she couldn't, but she was starting to let go of some of the anger that had consumed her for so long. As she placed the last of their belongings in a box, she felt an odd sense of finality, but not closure. There would never be closure, not for her. But this was a step forward, a way to reclaim some of the space that had been overtaken by pain. The room, which had been a sanctuary of memories, now felt like a place of new beginnings. The phone call came the following day. It was Detective Hayes, his voice strained. "Leah, we got another lead." Leah's heart skipped a beat. Another lead? It felt like there was no end to this. The truth had been exposed, the trials were over, and the guilty had been sentenced. What more was there? "We've traced some of the network's members to another town," Hayes continued. "It looks like they're regrouping. They're planning something. We're not sure what yet, but they're still out there." Leah's stomach turned. She had fought so hard to expose them, to make sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. And yet the evil was still there, still out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for its next chance to strike. She was silent for a moment, the weight of everything threatening to crush her. But then something inside her clicked. She couldn't run from this. She couldn't let this evil keep lurking in the dark, no matter how exhausted she felt. "I'm with you, Hayes," she said, her voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes." In that moment, Leah knew her fight wasn't over. She had uncovered the truth, but the battle was far from won. The network was still out there, still operating in the shadows, and she couldn't rest until it was completely dismantled. The next few months were a blur of effort and intensity. Hayes and Leah worked tirelessly, connecting the dots between the various towns, tracking down the remaining members of the occult network. There were moments of fear, moments when it seemed like they were chasing ghosts. But each new discovery brought them closer to unraveling the full extent of the horror that had been perpetuated over the decades. It was grueling work. The network was more insidious than anyone could have imagined. The people involved were well-connected, powerful, and desperate to hold on to their dark influence. But Leah wouldn't let them win. She had already lost too much. One evening, after a particularly long day of tracking leads, Leah stood by the window in her living room, watching the sun set over the quiet town of Woodmere. It was hard to believe that this place, one so full of peace and promise, had been the site of so much pain. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, she realized something. Woodmere was finally free. The evil had been exposed. The truth had been fought for. And while the scars would never completely fade, Leah knew she had done everything she could. Isaac and David's memory would live on, not just in her heart, but in the legacy of the fight she had fought for them, for all the victims. The battle wasn't over, but Leah had won one war, and she would keep fighting until the last of the darkness was gone. She owed that to Isaac and David, and to herself. The investigation into the ritualistic network that had plagued Woodmere for so long had dragged on for months. The deeper Leah and Hayes delved into the darkness of what had been hidden beneath the town's serene surface, the more they uncovered. Despite the exhaustion, despite the long nights and the emotional toll it was taking on her, Leah couldn't stop now. Isaac and David's disappearance had set off a chain of events that led to the unearthing of a horrific truth. A network of people spanning several towns, each involved in dark rituals that had taken children, stolen their lives, and perpetuated a cycle of unimaginable suffering. These people had kept their power through silence, through fear, and through the blood of innocents. But now, with the truth in the open, their control was slipping away. And Leah would not rest until it was completely dismantled. After months of hard work, the final blow came when the last of the remaining conspirators was captured. The network, once so entrenched in secrecy and power, had finally been exposed. The trials were long, and the charges against those involved were severe. Some pleaded guilty, some were convicted, and others faced even darker revelations as their secrets came to light. The justice system moved slowly, but it moved. Yet even as Leah watched the guilty parties being led away in handcuffs, the sense of finality was bittersweet. No punishment would bring her sons back. No verdict would heal the wounds in her heart. But Leah knew that by exposing the truth, she had ensured that no other child would suffer the way Isaac and David had. The town of Woodmere was forever changed. The small, tight-knit community that had once been a place of quiet comfort now stood as a symbol of the cost of silence, of the horrors that could grow when evil was allowed to fester unchecked. Woodmere was healing, slowly but surely, but the scars would remain. As for Leah, the weight of it all was something she would carry for the rest of her life. There were moments when the grief hit her like a wave, a sharp, unbearable ache that left her breathless. The loss of Isaac and David, the loss of her peace, was something she could never undo. But with each passing day, she found ways to honor them, ways to carry their memory without letting it consume her. She started a foundation in their name, dedicated to preventing the kind of horrors they had experienced. It was a way to turn the pain into something that could help others, a way to ensure that their deaths weren't in vain. The foundation worked with law enforcement to identify and stop occult practices and ensure that children were safe. It wasn't easy and it wasn't quick, but it was a start. Leah found herself speaking at community events, meeting with parents, and sharing her story with anyone who would listen. She spoke not just of the horrors of what had been done to her family, but also of the resilience of the human spirit, of the power of truth, and of the need for justice. She shared her story so that others wouldn't have to live through what she had endured. She refused to let fear dictate the future. Despite all of this, Leah's life felt hollow at times. Her sons were gone, and nothing could ever fill the void they left behind. But through the foundation, through the justice, and through the knowledge that their story had brought light to a deep, suffocating darkness, she found a small measure of peace. One morning, as Leah sat in her quiet kitchen, sipping a cup of tea, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope. It wasn't grand or world-changing, but it was real. Her heart, though scarred, was still capable of love, still capable of finding meaning in a world that had once seemed so cruel. The sun was shining through the windows, casting a soft glow over the room. Leah looked around, taking in the warmth of the moment. For the first time in a long time, she felt the faintest stirrings of peace. She would never forget Isaac and David. She would never stop fighting for them, for the truth, for justice. But she knew now that it was okay to move forward, not forgetting, but healing, not moving on, but growing. She would carry their memory with her for the rest of her life. And in that, she had found a quiet strength, a strength that no darkness could ever take away. And as the days passed, Leah continued the work she had started, a work born from loss, but fueled by love. The fight was far from over, but it was hers to fight. And with each new day, she knew that her son's spirits, though lost to the world, lived on in the legacy she had built for them. In the end, Leah found peace not in forgetting the past, but in confronting it, in embracing it, and in honoring the memory of the two boys who had given everything to expose the evil that had lurked beneath the surface. Woodmere had been a town of secrets, but no more. It had been forever changed by the truth, and with that truth, Leah found the strength to keep moving forward, one day at a time.